Oh, that's okay, honey. I have it already. You remember? Hi, everybody. I hope you're all well tonight. I'm feeling pretty good myself. Tonight's topic is a survival package and Karen Bass. And by the way, this is the In-Depth show, in case you don't know, and my name is Joe Firestone. And if you look at the graphic, you'll see that I have a Patreon account there. Please occasionally give to my Patreon account. I would very much appreciate that. It helps me to keep these programs going. So, thank you very much. And here we are. Kay says, I was just watching a live stream of Bernie and the new progressive candidates. Very cool. Well, Kay, it turns out that I was watching the very same thing. I was watching Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib with Bernie Sanders. And they all seem to be enjoying a session with Uncle Bernie. It was great to see them all so friendly. It's clear Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush are two more recruits for the squad. So the squad is certainly up to 6 now. I suspect they're going to be joined by Mondaire Jones also, that he's going to be the 7th. And I think we're going to have a number of other progressives in other sections of the country who are going to be there too. And good evening, Claudette. And good evening, Steve. Good evening, Dolores. And good evening, Kay, of course. Okay, and there we are. I know there's a lot of competition this evening. A lot of good stuff is going on. Jeff Ginter was going to have a good show, okay, at 8 o'clock on the Con. So that was going to be worth watching, and I don't know that it might still be going on. And, of course, Bernie is probably still on. So there are a number of different things going on as well, and therefore we're a little bit of a small group here for now. I hope we're going to grow a little bit later on. But in the meantime, let's get on with our agenda for tonight. There was a very good article appeared in Counterpunch by Dean Baker, who's a well-known economist at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. And I'm not exactly sure what his title is, but he's one of the 2 co-founders of the think tank. And a very good economist. He's not an MMT economist, but he sort of follows the University of Massachusetts School, of economics. They're in many ways close compatriots, of ours. Certainly their sentiments are in the same direction. And as you'll see, Dean Baker here is very much concerned with something that the MMT economists are concerned with also. And the title of this article is We Need an Economic Survival Package, Not Another Stimulus. It was written on August 4th, 2020 by Dean Baker. And Dean points out that there's enormous confusion about what we should be trying to accomplish in the next relief package for the pandemic. This is best demonstrated by Republicans' obsession with getting people back to work with a mixture of cuts to unemployment benefits and return to work bonuses. Dean says, ignoring the questionable economic logic, there's zero evidence of large numbers of jobs going unfilled. This approach also ignores the reality of the pandemic. As usual, the Republicans are motivated by ideology and not by reality, and don't. I'm not saying this is also true of the Democrats. In many cases, in many instances, in many situations, it's also true of the Democrats too. But it's almost always true of the Republicans. In other words, they're trying to address a problem, which is people, according to them, are not going to work because they're getting paid too much in unemployment insurance benefits. And if we cut back on those and we put some bonuses at the other end, more people are going to be going to work. But as Dean says, there's zero evidence of large number of jobs going unfilled. The jobs in the private sector are not there. They're not there because the private sector businesses are closed. The businesses that used to employ them are closed. In many instances, are failing. This approach also ignores the reality of the pandemic, as Dean says. At the start of April, both houses voted nearly unanimously to support measures that were designed to make it possible for people to stay at home rather than work. At that time, we had roughly 35,000 new infections a day. Currently, we are seeing well over 60,000 new infections a day, with the count crossing 70,000 in many recent days. Dean notes the comparison looks even worse if we pull out New York and New Jersey, both of which were overwhelmed by the pandemic at the start of April. Between them, they had roughly 15,000 new infections a day, which means the rest of the country was seeing close to 20,000. By contrast, at present, both states have the virus relatively under control, which means that the new infection count in the country would still be over 60,000 a day, excluding New York and New Jersey. This raises the obvious point. If Congress thought it made sense to allow, encourage, and possibly even require people to stay home rather than work at the start of April, how could it possibly make sense to push people to work at a time when the rate of new infections is more than 3 times as high in areas outside of New York and New Jersey? Now, I haven't seen anybody else ask that question, but that is an obvious question that people ought to be asking at this point. Don't you agree? If it made sense in March to allow, encourage, and possibly even require people to stay home when they passed the CARES Act on March 23rd, right? Rather than work at the start of April, how could it possibly make sense to push people to work at a time when the rate of new infections is more than 3 times as high in areas outside of New York and New Jersey? And by the way, infections are a leading indicator of fatalities. The fatalities themselves are a lagging indicator. With 70,000 new infections per day, we are going to be getting a huge number of new fatalities. To get the fatalities down, those fatalities are already locked in. To start getting fatalities down, we have to keep people at home. We have to do just the same thing that we were doing earlier before we decided to push the reopening. As Dean correctly says, this is really a question of life and death. Tens of millions of workers have serious health conditions that mean they would be at considerable danger if they became infected. Tens of millions more workers would be putting into danger family members with serious health conditions if they became infected. As a result, a high percentage of the workforce has very good reasons for not wanting to return to work just now. If we face the reality of the pandemic, we should not be designing a package to get people back to work. We need to design a package to keep them whole through a period in which tens of millions of people will still not be able to work because of the pandemic. This means that we want people to have the money to pay their rent or mortgage and to buy food and other necessary items. I think this means that we who care about people want people to have the money to pay their rent or mortgage and to buy food and other necessary items. On the other hand, there are a lot of other people in our country and many in Congress who view the situation through an ideological lens that says that people need to work to pay for their own rent or mortgage and to buy food, and they always need to work, and we can never compromise on that. There are people who cling to that as an ideology, and they care about that more than they care about the lives of the people that they are pushing out of their homes. I don't. And I dare say Dean doesn't, and I dare say most of you who are watching tonight do not. We don't want people to be going out to restaurants and bars, to see movies or baseball games, or to fly away on vacations or go on a cruise ship, as Dean says, as Dean puts it. There was considerable confusion at this point even back in March and April, where many were referring to the bills passed by Congress as stimulus bills. Some were even pushing types of spending that could boost the economy. There was little reason to want to boost the economy back in April, nor should there be now. We want to make it so that people endure as little hardship as possible for now, and the economy to be prepared to start up quickly as possible once the pandemic is under control. And by the way, now you see the huge mistake the government made, the huge mistake it made in trying to open up too soon. I warned about that at the beginning of COVID. At the beginning of COVID, back in March, I went over an article written by an epidemiologist from Harvard that was precisely outlining a scenario where we would go back to try to open up the economy too soon after cutting back on cases and deaths somewhat, and then the pandemic would come right back, okay, and then we would be back where we started from. We are now back where we started from, but worse, because COVID-19 is far more widely spread than it was in March and April. Many more people have it now. As Deborah Birx said a few days ago, it is everywhere now. It is in the rural areas now. It is in the red states now. It's just not in New York and New Jersey and California and on the West Coast anymore. It's all over the country. We're worse off now than we were earlier. Trump is still saying it's going to go away. it's going to go away and that the kids should go to school. He just said it again earlier today. There was a news article in Common Dreams about this. We want to make it, to repeat what Dean said, we want to make it so that people endure as little hardship as possible for now, and the economy to be prepared to start up as quickly as possible once the pandemic is under control. Hence the title of this article. We don't want a stimulus package. We want a survival package. A survival package for people who must stay home. Of course, Dean says, we should not be in this situation. Most of the economy was shut down from the middle of March to the middle of May, with major restrictions staying in place in the hardest hit areas well into June. These restrictions did largely bring the pandemic under control in places like New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Massachusetts, and Washington, both state and D.C. Unfortunately, many states did not take the need for restricting business seriously and began to open at the start of May. This is the reason that states like Arizona, Georgia, Florida, and Texas now have major outbreaks. California also now has a major outbreak, as a lack of financial support from the federal government, coupled with political pressure orchestrated by Donald Trump in the form of Liberate California protests, led the state to relax restrictions sooner than it should have. And by the way, why did California lack financial support from the federal government? Because Governor Newsom's cousin, Nancy Pelosi, refused to bargain hard at the time of the CARES Act and get a sufficient amount of funding, $1 trillion, for the state and local governments at that time. That was one of the gross errors she made with the CARES Act, because she didn't take advantage of the maximum amount of leverage she had at that time, but preferred to wait. At least now, she seems to be sticking to it. And she seems to be fighting for the post office now, and she seems to be fighting for state and local governments too, as well as survival packages for individuals. All enormously important. All enormously important. California also now has a major outbreak as a lack of financial support from the federal government, coupled with political pressure orchestrated by Donald Trump in the form of Liberate California protests, led the state to relax restrictions sooner than it should have. So the murderer in the White House murdered some people in California through his Liberate California protests, just as he's been doing it all over the country in various ways. It would be possible to talk about an economic reopening now if we had been successful in bringing the pandemic under control, as is the case in Europe and East Asia, in addition to the Northeast and the United States. But we can't make plans based on a reality that does not exist. The pandemic is more out of control than ever in most of the country. This means that we again have to plan for another period in which the economy will not be operating normally by design. We need to focus on keeping people whole. The centerpiece of the Keeping People Whole strategy should be the continuation of the $600 weekly supplements to unemployment checks. I bet you differ with Dean on this. The centerpiece of a Keeping Whole strategy should have been, all along, providing people with a basic income, as was specified in Rashida Tlaib's Automatic Booster Communities Act, now being co-sponsored by a number of people, but principally by Pramila Jayapal, who is pushing that bill. That should have been the centerpiece of keeping people whole, because it provided for $2,000 per month of income, not just to the unemployed, but to every man and woman in the United States. It also provided $1,000, $1,000 per month for children. And that was to be for the duration of the crisis. We would never have had the crisis we're having now, where the supplements are running out, because there wouldn't have been supplements to run out. People could have gotten their basic income. They could have gotten their regular unemployment checks from the states. It wouldn't have mattered if they'd gone on to unemployment. Dean says, we can debate whether $600 a week is the right sum, but unemployment benefits have fallen far below the levels that would allow millions of workers to sustain anything close to their normal living standards through a period of prolonged unemployment. In order for millions of workers who are unemployed due to the pandemic to be able to pay their mortgage or rent and cover other unavoidable expenses, it will be necessary to have a substantial supplement to normal benefits. And by the way, the ABC would have been a substantial supplement, to normal benefits, because it would have produced $4,000 a month for a couple, whether one of them was unemployed or not, and an extra $1,000 for each child. So, for a family with two children, it would have produced $600 a month in benefits. $600 a month. That would have exceeded the unemployment benefits, and it would have gone not only to the unemployed, but also to people who are either employed or who were not in the labor force. It would have gone to everybody as a basic right during the pandemic period. By the way, the ABC Act was to be funded with trillion-dollar coins. So we wouldn't have had to tax in order to do it. We would not have had to borrow in order to do it. We could simply have used the proceeds from the platinum coins. There have been numerous complaints from Republicans and some economists that these supplements will discourage people from working. This is undoubtedly true in some cases, but this is the point. It is the point. It is the point. When people interview Mnuchin, and Mnuchin is saying, when he was saying people should not have unemployment benefits that are this high because it introduces a disincentive to work, the news people should immediately have fired back at him and should have said, Secretary, we have a pandemic that is out of control. We don't want to force people to work and threaten their own health and or the health of family members. We don't want to send them back to work until we get the pandemic under control. So, you shouldn't even be working on unemployment benefits with the Democrats. You should be working on a basic income for everybody. You should be negotiating with them to support the Automatic Boost for Communities Act. Okay, I know that the way politics is in Washington right now, everybody is thinking in terms of maintaining the $600 a week of unemployment benefits. And believe me, that is far better than cutting the unemployment benefits to $200 a week or $400 a week. $600 a week is much better. It keeps body and soul together for the unemployed people. But that's not the only problem. I recognize that's probably what's going to happen, but that's not what people should be doing. We always want to keep in mind what they should be doing. Okay, now Jayapal, with her salary and wage replacement bill, that is a payroll, the payroll protection bill that she is sponsoring, that nationalizes payroll, and then the bill that she's co-sponsoring with Rashida Tlaib, the ABC Act, those two acts would have covered everything. That would have been great. I mean, Rashida had the solution, the survival package, in her hands, and neither the Republicans nor the Democratic leadership would listen to her. And that's why we have the mess we have now. Some have raised the issue that it's not fair that some people who are working at low-paying jobs are getting less from their paychecks than other workers are getting from being unemployed. Dean says, this isn't fair, but there is much that is going on in this pandemic that is not fair. For example, the government is paying the pharmaceutical company Moderna $955 million to develop and test a vaccine. Then after covering the research and testing costs, Trump will also give Moderna a monopoly, that is a patent monopoly, that will allow it to charge prices that are far more than 2,000% above the cost of manufacturing and delivering the vaccine. And the news broke today that what that company, Moderna, was going to do was to charge, where is the article? I just saw it in Common Dreams. Taking taxpayers for a ride. This is just the headline. Moderna to charge $32 to $37 per dose for COVID-19 vaccine developed entirely with public funds. The federal government should be dictating that price. We paid for the research. We should not have to pay again by paying for the vaccine. That vaccine should be a nominal price, and that nominal price should be covered by the federal government. We don't want to charge people for that. We want everybody to get a dose of the vaccine so we end the pandemic. What sense does it make to charge $32 to $37 a dose and have some people not want to take the dose? If you got 2 people in the family, if you got 4 people in the family, $37 a dose times 4, that's a lot of money for a poor family. They might decide to take their chances and endanger the rest of us by taking their chances. Why would we want that? Why is that good? Why does it make any sense? What are these stupid people doing? So, what the heck did I do with the Counterpunch article? Can't find it anymore. Hang on a second, folks. I think I inadvertently got rid of my Counterpunch article. Well, oh no, I didn't. It's here. Okay. So then, after covering the research and testing cost, we'll also give a patent monopoly. Yeah. The company is getting the patents in spite of the fact that taxpayers paid for the research and took all the risk. Several top executives of the company have already made tens of millions on stock options as a result of their government contracts. There are similar stories at other pharmaceutical and medical equipment companies. Yes, Trump is allowing them to get fat on the misery being caused by this particular vaccine. So the people are sharing the pain. The companies are getting fat. Typical Trump, typical Republican stuff, typical neoliberal stuff. So the fact that some workers may be getting less money at low-paying jobs than other workers are getting from unemployment insurance is unfair. But if this is someone's biggest concern over unfairness, they are not paying attention to the world around them. Others have also expressed concerns that these unemployment insurance supplements are making it hard for employers to find workers. There is zero evidence this is a problem. There are millions of unemployed workers anxious to find jobs. If employers were having difficulty getting workers, we should be seeing an increase in the number of job openings for unfilled positions. In fact, openings are very low. We should also be seeing rapidly rising wages as employers compete for available workers. The most recent data on compensation that controls for changes in the mix of the workforce found that compensation growth slowed sharply in the second quarter. There will be workers who fall through the cracks and don't get unemployment insurance. Sorry, slip of the tongue. To try to help as many of these workers as possible, we should expand both the size and eligibility criteria for SNAP. We should. We also must ensure that the moratoriums on evictions and moratoriums on foreclosures remain in safe throughout the rest of the year. And how about a federal moratorium on evictions and foreclosures? Not just in federally owned properties, but all properties. No evictions, no foreclosures. And not just throughout the rest of the year, for the duration of the coronavirus crisis and for 6 months thereafter. Some of the other items that should be in the rescue package are funding for state and local governments. The Postal Service will also need substantial additional funding to prevent large-scale layoffs, which, of course, if we want to have vote by mail, we cannot have large-scale layoffs. We need to have additions to the Postal Service. State and local governments have already laid off 1.6 million workers. Additional funding will allow them to hire back many of these workers and prevent the layoffs of millions of additional workers, estimated at 5.4 million workers. These governments also have an essential role to play in bringing the pandemic under control, doing things like testing and tracing, providing health care to coronavirus patients, and ensuring that workplaces and businesses are safe. In the same vein, we need money now to allow schools to reopen safely. It is very important for both children and parents that the schools be open, but plans have to be put in place to allow for safe reopenings. Unfortunately, there was no national leadership or money for this effort over the summer. Trump just sat on his big fat ass, and now most schools are not prepared to reopen. The next rescue package must have the money to allow for schools to make the necessary arrangements so that they can have safe reopenings as soon as possible. We also need to try to lay the groundwork for a quick recovery when the pandemic is brought under control. The Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, supposedly for small business, was useful for this purpose, keeping many businesses intact through a period in which they were operating well below capacity or shut down completely. It would be good to extend this through the next 3 months. Why not just extend it until the crisis is over? Why put arbitrary time limits on things when we don't know that those time limits are going to be sufficient? And every time there's a time limit on something, Congress has to get back together and fight over whether it should be extended or not. These things are all needed during the pandemic. Make them last at least until the end of the pandemic. How will we know when the end of the pandemic is? We'll know when the end of the pandemic is when people stop dying in large numbers from the disease. When new cases fall to a relative trickle, that's when we're going to have this under control. Until then, any reopenings have to be with the utmost of caution, and they have to be done in such a way that extreme care is taken to make sure everything is sanitized, all the social distance we need is there, contact testing, contact tracing is in place for everybody, and isolation and quarantine is enforced on everybody. That's what we need. This is serious business. We have fooled around with it too much already. There are nations out there, sizable nations, with millions in population, that have only 4 deaths per million. And we have, what is it today? I didn't check the number for today. It's above 480, though, I think. It's already above 480 deaths per million. We also need to ensure that our child care facilities are up and running. Lack of affordable child care has long been a problem, but it has become much worse in the pandemic, as many child care centers have closed. Of course they've closed. How can they stay open? We'll need adequate child care arrangements if we want to ensure that parents are able to go back to work when the pandemic is brought under control. One item that is completely unnecessary is the pandemic checks that gave every adult $1,200 in the first round and seemed destined to be included in the last round as well. While these checks give Donald Trump something to put his name on, they did little to keep people home, the shutdown, and are likely to provide much of a demand boost when we reopen. However, those $1,200 checks per individual were very useful, Dean Baker, to people on Social Security who are living on very, very small stipends. They're useful to everybody whose primary income comes from Social Security. I can attest to the fact that they're very useful for that purpose. For a couple, they actually deliver $2,400 in sorely needed money during the pandemic, where people have extra expenses related to health care. While these checks give Donald Trump something to put his name on, they did little to keep people whole in the shutdown and are not likely to provide much of a demand boost when we reopen. Of course, if the ABC Act was passed, a real survival package, then Social Security people could also dispense with the $1,200 stimulus checks. We would not need them then. Neither would other people who really needed those $1,200, because they'd each be getting $2,000 a month in a basic income. The vast majority of these checks were saved, with the saving rate out of disposable income soaring to 25% in the second quarter. The saving rate was hovering near 8% before the pandemic. Well, that's nice for people who were able to save, but there were a lot of people who were not able to save from those checks, but had to use the checks for other things that were sorely needed. The overwhelming majority of people who received these checks did not suffer any substantial fall in income as a result of the pandemic. They're either still getting full pay at their job or were retired. It is difficult to understand what the purpose of these checks is supposed to be. To be clear, at a time when the economy is operating well below its capacity, there is no particular harm in adding $1,200 to everyone's bank account. This is not about causing an inflationary spiral, in large part because people are not spending the money. But if there are political limits on the size of the pandemic package, knocking out a $300 billion item that serves no real purpose is a very good place to start. Dean Baker, don't invite them to do this, because there are no real financial limits on the size of the pandemic package right now. You should know this by now, and you should be stating it. If there are political limits on the size of the pandemic package, let us inveigh against the political limits on the size of the package. There's no reason for those political limits. They are irrational, and they're hurting people. And let's see you condemn them. So, that was Dean Baker's article. I had a lot of good things to say. I had a lot of things to say about it. The basic concept is very sensible. We don't need a stimulus package. We need a survival package. We need the ABC Act. We need the Jayapal Nationalization of Payroll Act. Those are the things that we really need right now during this particular crisis. Okay, let's stop that one, and let's get to Karen Bass. We've had in our group various statements, the correct statements, pointing out that Karen Bass is not well known, and asking what we know about her. And what I knew about her was that she was a liberal congressperson from California, chairperson of the Congressional Black Caucus, and that she was a supporter of Medicare for All and a supporter of the Green New Deal. But now comes a great piece by Harold Meyerson, a very well-known columnist who comes out of the labor movement and who's been writing forever, for years and years. He had a column, may still have a column in the Washington Post, and he also was a columnist for The Prospect, and has been also one for The Prospect for some time. So he had another column today called Karen Bass, the Movement of Activist as Vice President. So this is at the American Prospect, at prospect.org, and I've given the link in my description. It was dated August 5th, 2020, so it's brand new. Have I shared this yet? I guess not quite yet. So let me share it so you can see it. Share the screen. Da, 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 da. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the article begins, quote, "The rightful favorite of the whole party," unquote. In recent weeks, this phrase, which a dying Lenin coined to Nikolai Bukharin, the Bolshevik leader he hoped would succeed him, has struck me as a pretty good description of Karen Bass, the Los Angeles congresswoman who is now one of the frontrunners to become Joe Biden's running mate. Why is this previously obscure representative now fast becoming the rightful favorite across the Democratic Party? To begin with, she's the one African-American contender with the kind of progressive chops that could help bolster Biden's support among both young blacks and leftists still reluctant to work or vote for him or contribute to him. Should Biden decide he can't go with Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Bass is the sole remaining vice presidential contender with a long record, indeed longer than Warren's, of working tirelessly for the causes of economic and racial justice. In fact, her record of doing this is nearly as long as Bernie Sanders' record. Not in the Congress, because she's more recently in the Congress, but she's been working tirelessly for these causes for a very long time, as we'll see. Bass may check every one of the Democrats' boxes: black, female, but progressive, pragmatic, coalition builder, someone who doubles down on Biden's capacity for empathy, which so many Americans wish to see in their leaders. But she's also coming under a rapidly escalating red-baiting onslaught from Donald Trump's henchmen. Not only from Trump's henchmen, but from Chuck Todd, who supposedly wasn't a henchman of Donald Trump. He was red-baiting Karen Bass the other day because she said a few nice things about Cuban health care and the drugs they've developed and how useful they might be. To be sure, Bass came of age in the militant milieu of South Los Angeles, anti-LAPD and social justice activists. But her own activism was always key to winning majority support through organizing, listening, and persuasion. It's those attributes that have enabled her to thrive as she moved into mainstream politics. Bass only recently came to broad public consciousness for authoring the far-reaching police reform bill that passed the House, and for persuading every single House Democrat and even 3 Republicans to support it. But this is a cause she's been working at for the past 47 years. 47 years. That takes us back to 1973. Quote, I met Karen in 1973 when I was 20, and she must have been 19. Unquote. Says former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. Quote, working on the campaign against police abuse. She was an activist in the African American community, and I was an activist in the Latino community, but we both focused on building a Latino African American coalition. She wasn't trying to be in front of the cameras. She was a door-to-door community organizer, unquote. Curtailing the LAPD's endemic racism and brutality was already a hardy perennial cause of the LA left when Bass, and Villaraigosa were young leftists, reaching across racial and ideological lines in the sometimes ethnocentric and sectarian left circles of that time was not a habit common to all such activists. Bass, though, excelled at it, and it's a habit she's honed in the ensuing decades as the universal Democratic support she won for a bill cracking down on previously sacrosanct levels of police immunity clearly illustrates. Lining up a unified vote on what for some members was a tough issue, no wonder Nancy Pelosi is reported to have talked up Karen Bass in her phone calls to Joe Biden. Steering the first ever serious police reform bill through the House, no wonder California's convention delegates pledged to Bernie Sanders said she was their top choice for vice president. Now that is interesting. California's convention delegates pledged to Bernie Sanders said that Karen Bass, not Elizabeth Warren, was their top choice for vice president. That and her long and strong support for Medicare for All and the New Deal. The key to Bass is that while, quote, she deeply comes out of the movement, unquote, as Villaraigosa says, she also has a keen eye for how to win support for progressive causes from people far removed from the movement's sensibilities, largely through her ability to understand those others' sensibilities. Her aptitude at this is one reason she was elected by her peers to head the Congressional Black Caucus. Quote, winning that post shows her ability to play in different parts of the country, unquote, says University of Southern California professor uh, 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 Manuel Pastor, who's analyzed many of the social movements in which Bass has played key roles. Quote, to lead the CBC, you have to connect with urban and rural districts, not just with coastal cities, but with the South and the Midwest, unquote. Not surprisingly, Bass has built a stronger relationship between the CBC and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, as well as with the Asian and Pacific Islander Caucus, too. Hello, Tulsi Gabbard. Quote, she's continued the cross-ethnic coalitions she's built in the 70s, unquote, says Villaraigosa. I'm sorry, Villaraigosa. Sorry. Perhaps Bass's most impressive piece of cross-ethnic work came in the aftermath of 1992 Los Angeles uprising that erupted in spasmodic reaction to the acquittal of the 4 cops who'd beaten Rodney King 2 years earlier. Bass had founded the Community Coalition devoted to improving conditions in South LA at a time when it was mired in crime, gang warfare, and a drug epidemic. The authorities, including then Senator Joe Biden, prescribed intensifying the, quote, war on drugs, unquote, with the heightened police presence in minority communities and even more mass incarceration, quote, solutions, unquote, which the LAPD took to with its accustomed brutality. Bass believed that involving the community in diagnosing and addressing South LA's ailments would produce more sustainable, less harmful strategies. COCO members went door to door and found that what residents wanted most was to diminish the number of liquor stores and cheap motels in the area, both of which had become centers of drug dealing and violence. At the time, most of South LA's liquor stores were owned and operated by Korean immigrants. In the 92 uprising, a number of participants vandalized, set fire to, and otherwise destroyed liquor stores. Some of them ventured out of South Central to damage establishments in LA's Koreatown, a couple of miles to the north. Shop owners and employees were threatened. Some were badly injured. In the months following the uprising, Bass believed the drive to reduce the prevalence of liquor stores had to continue and persuaded the LA City Council to pass an ordinance that limited the number of liquor stores that could be rebuilt in South LA. Just as important, however, was to do this in such a way that Black Korean tensions were diminished and Korean store owners didn't have to bear the brunt of that transition. Even before the riots, Bass had helped to build the Black Korean Alliance under the aegis of the Los Angeles County Human Relations Commission. Right after the uprising, quote, she reached out to me, unquote, says Jay Lee Wong, who worked for the commission, quote again, since she was concerned the resolution could be perceived as anti-Korean, and she wanted my help in reaching Korean community leaders and Korean media, unquote. Bass held numerous meetings, multiple meetings with the Korean Grocers Association, which included the liquor store owners, and the Korean Chamber of Commerce, hearing their concerns as they heard hers. She pushed to the city council not simply to limit the number of liquor stores, but to provide financial assistance to those store owners who wanted to replace them with other kinds of establishments, such as with laundromats. Her work, quote, was successful, in mitigating a lot of the tension, uh, unquote, says Jae Lee Wong, and Korean language media ended up supporting her efforts. Quote, she was always foreseeing both opportunities and obstacles, thinking ahead to prevent negative situations, adds Mr. Wong. By the turn of the millennium, Bass's work for progressive causes and her ability to cross political boundaries to promote them had brought her to the attention of a number of civic leaders and elected officials, not just in Black LA, but in the city's emerging uh, 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 in the city's emerging Labor Latino alliance, which had become Los Angeles' new political dynamo. In 2003, I was interviewing the man at the center of that dynamo, LA County Federation of Labor, Miguel Contreras, when he surprised me with an offhand but unusually specific observation. Quote, Karen Bass is thinking about running for the assembly next year, unquote, he said, in a district encompassing the historically black Crenshaw area and a slice of LA's west side. The incumbent would have to vacate the seat due to term limits. Quote, she'll win easily, unquote, he said, quote again, and she'll become speaker after Fabian Nunez is termed out, unquote, in 2008. Contreras, who died in 2005, remains the only genius-level political strategist I've known. Harold Morrison has known a lot of political strategists over the years, including Barack Obama. So if he says that the only genius-level political strategist was Contreras, then that's quite a compliment. But his conviction that Bass would become Speaker, something no black woman had yet achieved, still stands out to me as an inspired act of prophecy. What he apparently saw in Bass, a deep commitment to principle, but also a pragmatism about how to turn such principles into law, and a capacity to work well across a wide political universe, was a level of talent that he recognized as exceptional. Not surprisingly, Bass had to be persuaded by her fellow activists and political pros like Villaraigosa and Contreras to run for office at all. It had never been a part of her game plan. Indeed, the number of radical political contacts she'd made as an organizer attest to her belief that she wasn't destined for mainstream leadership in politics. Quote, she's always been about the issues, not about political self-promotion, unquote, says the former mayor Villaraigosa. Quote, he adds, she had to be convinced to run. I called her and said, look, imagine what it would be like for a young black girl to see you as Speaker of the legislature of America's largest state, unquote. Bass's eventual speakership was not the one that anyone had envisioned. She ascended to the post in 2008 as the economy collapsed, and the revenues of the state government collapsed with it. She became the Democratic legislature's chief interlocutor with Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger in fashioning a budget that cut deeply into programs she had long sought to expand. Some of her fellow progressives criticized her, but the credibility of her commitments kept the Democrats united behind her. The crucial factor in retaining that support, Pastor notes, was that, quote, she made sure the cuts didn't destroy social programs. They merely reduced spending levels so the programs could rebound when the economy did, unquote. Due to her efforts, healthcare and safety net programs that the Republicans wanted to axe nonetheless survived. And more remarkably, Republican legislators, including Kevin McCarthy, now the Republican leader in the House of Representatives, came away from these battles favorably impressed by Bass's diligent search to find just enough common ground, excuse me a second, based on her capacity to understand their concerns to enable the budget to pass. Though Biden and Bass come from different worlds politically, Pastor sees one crucial commonality, quote, in a nation that's deeply grieving, both Biden and Bass effuse empathy and recognize the need for healing, unquote, he says. Quote, Karen's whole approach to the crack epidemic and the post 1992 rebuilding, it was all about healing. It was about bringing people together to get over the trauma and grief and separation. But today, in this very trying moment for America, Karen's personality plays exceptionally well, unquote. Will her personality, her abilities, and her record play well enough for Biden to give her the nod? Her longstanding position on policing certainly gives her the potential to bring more progressives and young blacks to the polls than Kamala Harris or Val Demings could at the other end of the political spectrum. Her empathetic and non-divisive manner has won her not just the respect of Kevin McCarthy, but the support of George Will. And who's more truly conservative than George Will? There are people more right-wing than George Will, but he's the closest thing to a classical capital C conservative that we have in America. We don't grow them in America. Her pragmatism is an asset too. Long before she was under consideration for the vice presidency, she kept telling progressives that they need to deal with Biden if he were elected, and that relentlessly bad-mouthing him was not the way to win his ear. I'm not sure about that. That's one side of the ledger. The other is that, like many young black activists in South Los Angeles, in the wake of the 1965 Watts uprising and the unrelenting abuse from the police, she was immersed for a time in a radical political culture, though, then as now, she exuded an openness, pragmatism, and affability not always in evidence in such cultures. Should Biden and his advisors think the Trump campaign's red baiting attacks on her, which have already begun, would eat into or even erase his and the Democrats' current lead, they may well go with somebody else. Should they go with Harris, however, that would leave a door open for Bass to do her work on a larger stage. If a Biden-Harris ticket is elected, that would create an open Senate seat in California, which is Governor Gavin Newsom would fill by appointment. No matter the right's attacks, Karen Bass would remain the rightful favorite of the whole hegemonic Democratic Party in California, and she'd make an excellent senator from the nation's largest state. Uh, I wonder about a couple of things, okay, in this article. Okay, the first thing is, okay, I'm not convinced that the way to get Biden to listen to you, okay, is only with honey, especially during the campaign. It seems to me we have to keep up our criticisms, okay, of Biden, our pushing, okay, of Biden. Those criticisms will make him stronger. And I have a short video I'll be putting out tomorrow morning. It's already done, but I've been holding it, okay, until tomorrow morning. And it'll be about criticizing Joe Biden because but such criticism is very important. The title of the piece will be Keep the Pressure On. It will only help Joe. So I'm not for whispering sweet nothings into Joe Biden's ear for the duration of the campaign. I'm not sure Karen Bass is. I think she'll tell Biden the truth as she sees the truth. She won't say it in public, though, and that means that if she's the choice, we'll have to say it in public, whatever she has to say to him in private. That's the first point. The second, cavil or maybe quarrel, okay, I have with this is the final focus on if there's a Biden-Harris ticket or a Biden-Demings ticket, okay. Well, I guess especially a Biden-Harris ticket because Harris is currently the senator, okay, from California. What Morrison is suggesting is, okay, that Newsom would fill the seat by appointment, and that Karen Bass would remain the rightful favorite for that particular seat, and she'd be an excellent senator. However, I'm not sure whether the governor would want her appointed as senator, okay, as opposed to a caretaker. Uh, okay, and the reason for that is that I think that Governor Newsom's next step is to become one of the senators from California. Of course, he might be waiting for Dorothy Feinstein's seat. She can't go on for too much longer. So maybe he would be content with an appointment, okay, of Karen Bass to Harris's seat. If that were to happen, California would certainly be the beneficiary because she's going to make a much, much finer senator than Kamala Harris is, for sure. Absolutely for sure. But that is Karen Bass's background. I think that should make us all feel a lot better about Karen Bass. But she's a lefty, but she's a progressive. She's far to the left of the establishment in the Democratic Party. She's establishment, but she's certainly at the left wing of the establishment. And I think you can even go so far as to say that ideologically, she is no neoliberal. From an ideological standpoint, she is much closer to the squad than she is to Nancy Pelosi, in my view. I think if we can't get a Barbara Lee into the vice presidency, then perhaps, and we can't get Bernie Sanders into the vice presidency, then perhaps the next best thing is Karen Bass. But now, I want to make one more point, okay, before I end, okay, and go to your comments, okay, about that. And that will not require me to keep sharing this. And that is, that when you see articles, no, Steve, we already have 160,000 dead. Now, we passed 160,000 dead earlier today. Okay, but anyway, okay, to get to the point, when you run over articles that are talking about vice presidential selection, they all talk about it from the standpoint of which of the choices is going to help Joe Biden the most in terms of the election against Donald Trump. Okay, but of course, they're all focusing on black women for the most part. When they stray away from black women, they go to Warren, okay, to Elizabeth Warren, okay, and they go to Tammy Duckworth, okay. For some reason, they never mention Tulsi Gabbard. But even more glaring, they never mention the person who would help Joe Biden the most if he were to become the vice presidential nominee. And we all know who that person is. And the truth is, if Joe Biden wanted to win the presidency and the most seats in the Congress for the Democrats, so that he could introduce supposedly the great many changes that he wants to introduce, the proper choice for vice president is not, in this case, a woman. It is not a black woman. It is not a woman of color. It is Bernie effing Sanders. Still. He would pull in the most independents. He would strengthen Biden with young people the most. He could bring the most funding to the campaign, the most grassroots funding to the campaign. He could bring the most excitement to the campaign. Biden really has to have the guts to go back on what he earlier said and to say, look, I've been thinking about this. I've been going over and over and over again. The most important thing is that we beat Trump and that we knock him dead so there can be no possible claims of fraud in this particular election. So that there can be no possible claims that somehow this was rigged, that somehow this was fudged. We have to beat him by so much that the next fascist who runs will also be beaten. And after thinking about it for a long time, even though I'd love to nominate a black woman, because it is time for a black woman, even though I'd like to, if our objective here is to kill fascism dead, and hammer a stake through its heart, as Steve Forbes used to say, then the person to do that on the ticket with me is Bernie Sanders. There is only one person who can do that, and that is Bernie Sanders. Okay. I'll consider your comments now. There haven't been too many. I don't think there were too many shares tonight. And for those of you who have shared, and I'm pretty sure I know who they are, thank you very much. I know you shared as much, okay, as possible. And Kay says, like-minded folks, Joe, laugh out loud. And Steve Gonza says, watching premiere of The Con on Real Progressives. Steve says, it was a great night for progressives. So that was last night. It was. Cori Bush won, and Rashida Tlaib won. And I think in Washington, I think that, in the Washington 10th, that, but Beth Dolio has gotten as far as the finals. I believe she came in second in that race. And that is good enough to get to the election on November 3rd, because they have a top two primary there. And Beth Dolio is very progressive and would be likely another member of the squad coming into the squad. Okay, today we saw Bernie with two people who are going to be new members of the squad. Cori Bush is one, of course, and Jamal Bowman, okay, is another. But also Mondaire Jones is likely to be joining the squad. And we've got a number of others yet throughout the country who may be joining the squad. We're going to have to wait and see. Kay Clark Ryan says, shared. Steve Wolfbrand says, the Mississippi is going off the charts with the COVID. Kay says, damn, Washer doesn't want to work for me tonight. I hate that. Yeah. Steve Wolfbrand said, here's in California, people receiving unemployment will have to pay income taxes on those checks come April 15th, and I doubt they will have the money to pay. Well, it's not April 15th now, right? It's past April 15th. It was July 15th. I think the next deadline for personal income taxes is October 15th. Steve Wolfbrand said 160,000 dead by the weekend. Let's see if we can get something a little more authoritative than that. I'll be with you in a minute. I'm going to pull that up. I'm going to pull up the latest COVID stats that I got. There we go. Okay. Okay, according to the Worldometer measurement, total debts in the United States as of today, as of now, 161,601. As of Wednesday, there's a chance that by this weekend we're going to have 165,000 deaths. and not 160,000 deaths. And deaths per million population are now 488 per million. I underestimated that. I looked at that 2 days ago, and it was something like 478 million. People are dying at a very rapid rate per day. I think it's the spike at the beginning of July beginning to claim people now, the spike in cases beginning to claim the people now. So the United States is now at 488. We are rapidly overtaking Chile. We're only 24 deaths per million in back of pay of Chile. We've long ago surpassed France, which has been at 464 for some time. They've kind of stabilized. Sweden has still not stabilized. It's gone up to 570. Of course, there are other nations like Italy and Spain and the UK. We still have a ways to go to catch them, but they've stabilized now. They're not growing very fast. Okay. There is Peru, which is way ahead of us at this point, at 613, and they are growing fast. They keep getting higher and higher and higher. They're higher than Spain now. They're doing a terrible job of handling COVID there. Not counting Andorra and San Marino, which are very small states, very small political units. Not fair to count them. The United States is now eighth most in the world in deaths per million. And of course, in total deaths, we are by far number one. Number two is Brazil with 97,418 deaths. And we're at 161,601 deaths. So, in absolute numbers, we're the highest. In deaths per capita, or in deaths per million population, we are number 8 in the world. And going up, rapidly going up. So, just thought it would be worthwhile to fill you in on that while we're talking about it. And Matt asks, I just came in, what did I miss? You didn't miss the discussion of Karen Bass. And Matt says, okay, says, not too much, Matthew. Yeah, it wasn't too much at that point. And Matt says, this is why all essential industries should be nationalized. Yes. And Kay says, the whole sick care for profit doesn't make any sense. Matt says, he agrees, it makes neither economic nor moral sense. Steve Wolfbrand says, Cory Booker rocked it. Yeah, she not only rocked the House, now she got to the Congress too. That's wonderful. And Carmen says, just got here. How are you doing? Hope things are looking up for everyone. Matt says, welcome, Avril Mano. Joe Segura says, Steve Wolfbrand, what did Booker do? Did he say Booker? I'm sorry. Oh, I thought he was talking about Cori Bush. I'm sorry. Yeah, what did Cory Booker do? Because he spelled Cory wrong. Cory Booker spells it C-O-R-Y. Cori Bush spells it C-O-R-I. Kay says, big real estate wants to buy up all those houses and gentrify them all to high buck rentals. Steve says, hi, Abdul. And Avril says, Steve Wolfbrand, salam. And Steve Wolfbrand said, she won her election, Joseph. It was Cori Bush who won her election, Steve, not Cory Booker. I thought you said Cori Bush at first. I mean, it says Cory Booker there, but I thought you said Cori Bush. I didn't even see the Booker. I saw the Bush. Avril says, hallelujah, Dr. J. Matt says, because any benefit that goes to the public must have 1,000 strings attached. Any benefit to the corporate oligarchs is free and clear. Avril says, hi, baby cakes. Avril says, well stated. Bonnie says, maybe the corporations think the price is right, and if they don't want to die, they will find a way to afford the prices. Now, the USA has to demand this to be free since their taxes were being used to fund the product. People with money forget they could be at any time in their life in the position of the people who make less in their lives. Well, of course, they don't think that. Most people think things will never change for them, and especially people who have many, 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 many millions of dollars have forgotten all the people who jumped off the Empire State Building in 1929 when the stock market crashed. Materato says that means-tested $1,200 was an insult, especially in light of the trillions that went to big business. We are the owners of this democracy, quote unquote, and this is how we are treated. Kay says, that $1,200 got me kicked off the Medicaid in my old age. Shake my head. Deborah says, sorry, I'm late. And Avril says, means testing is cruel and mean in these days of fiat abundance. And in these days of the coronavirus, of the pandemic, it's cruel and mean, and a product of neoliberal Republican ideology, and to some degree neoliberal Democratic ideology too. Steny Hoyer was giving Republican talking points the other day. God. Steve says $1,200 doesn't go far here in LA. Doesn't go far here in the Washington area either. Kay says $1,200 doesn't go too far anywhere these days, especially California. He says, the establishment is giving Bass a commie paint job because she's been to Cuba a few times. Disgusting. Yeah. We need to give Kamala Harris a fascist paint job. That's what we need to do. Because she's a lot closer to being a fascist than Karen Bass is to being a communist. Kay says, means-tested programs are made to keep you poor, not a hand up in any way anymore. Steve says, Bass has low name recognition. I like her, but I think she will be chosen for VP. I think you're saying you think that Harris will be chosen for VP. Bass has low name recognition, but when people see her, they're going to like her. But as I said, the person who you really want to appoint as the Vice President of the United States, who you really want to nominate, is Bernie effing Sanders. Still, you want a landslide? You really want a landslide? You want to have a chance of even taking Montana? You nominate Bernie effing Sanders. That's what you do. Matt says, this is silly. The DNC did not collude with puppet candidates, engage in voter suppression and election fraud to destroy Sanders, only to turn around and then start getting progressive. This is all theater. Well, true. It's true. They did not do that in order to start getting progressive. But at this point, Matt, it's up to Biden. It's not up to the DNC. Not anymore. They can't back out on Biden, whatever he decides to do. It's up to Joe Biden. He's free to make his choice for vice president, and the DNC will damn well shut up no matter what the hell he does and no matter who the hell he chooses, including Bernie. And Avril says, they're counting on McCarthyism to continue to do the mental brainwashing on voters that the establishment has been getting away with for 40 to 50 years, and it continues to work. I know. Steve says, correction, I don't think Bass will be chosen. Sorry. That's all right. I knew that's what you meant. Avril said, of course, too many intellectual, lazy Americans agreed. And Matt says, it's amazing to me that after all these years, that red baiting is still a viable strategy. Right. Especially since the Russian Reds aren't there. In other words, the Russians are no longer red. I don't care if Putin was brought up in the secret police. He's certainly not red. He's much closer to being a fascist than he is to being a communist. Avril says that her name is Karen might be an issue too. Just kidding. Steve says, actually, I might vote for Biden Bass ticket because Joe won't last a year. Ain't going to happen, though. That would make my day because Biden probably isn't going to be competent long. Steve Wilpern says, Doc, your Spanish pronunciation is terrible, laugh out loud. I'm sorry, I never took Spanish. My French pronunciation is much better. I took French. I thought at the time, see, this was back in the 1960s. Actually, it was back in the 50s when I first took French in school, when I could have taken Spanish. In fact, Jesus, was it even in the 50s? I can't even think. When did I first take? I first took French when I was 12 years old. So that was in 1951. I could have taken Spanish then. But in 1951, France seemed to me to be a more important language for a young American to know than Spanish. I know that in the intervening years, I've become wrong, that today Spanish is a more important language because there are so many more Spanish-speaking people than there are French-speaking people. And Matt says, it still sickens me that Sanders had millions in hashtag not me, us, who would have walked on hot coals for the movement, and he gave it all away to support a senile shill. I thought you were going to say a senile smile, because that would have rhymed. But same difference, senile shill. Avril says, nauseating. Avril says, I like this Karen. Steve says, Sleepy Joe did an interview today and went hostile on a reporter who asked about his dementia. Joe has anger problems. Yes, anger management problems is usually what it calls. Steve says, black Karens are different. Avril says, I read that. He went totally tantrum Trump. I mean, what did he have to lose? He was 78. He had a world historic pandemic fall into his lap. He had a senile prop about laboring under rape allegations. He had a veritable movement behind him. Ugh. What he had to lose, I think, was his chairpersonship of the Budget Committee. He wanted that very badly because it's a position of power in the Senate. And he didn't want to lose that. I think that's true. And I also think he didn't want to take down Joe Biden, because the personal connection was important to him. Steve says, Bernie who? Bernie who is the guy who can get Biden the most votes. That is what I'm saying, people. I think that's a correct analysis, closer to the truth than any other analysis of the situation. So if Biden wants to get the most votes and wants to get a landslide, he needs to nominate Bernie Sanders. Avril says, I have a black Karen friend and she's very chill until she starts that Jesus crap. But that's just about everyone in the South. It's almost impossible to get away from. Steve says, that's true. Steve Wolfbrand is like a bad mafia movie now. He's dead to me. Steve says, Tony Soprano would have Bernie whacked. Well, Tony Soprano would whack anybody, wouldn't he? Matt says, if the donor class supports Bass, that is all you need to know about Bass. I don't know if the donor class supports her. They've never supported her with large amounts of money. As far as I know, she doesn't take large amounts of money from the donor class. She relies more on grassroots contributions. Alva said, did any progressives win any elections yesterday? I've been out of the loop for a few days, just now catching up. Yes, many did, Avril. Fantastic. But Paula Jean. Was Paula Jean's primary yesterday? I don't believe it was yesterday. And Lana says, the more I hear of Karen Bass, the more I like her. Rashida said, Rashida won in Michigan, Cori Bush in Missouri, and Beth Dolio got into the finals of the election in Washington. Avro says, didn't hear about her. She's inspiring for sure. Steve Wolfman said, there were many amazing victories. There were many Native American swells in local state races. Cori Bush and Rashida were probably the major victories. The squad is growing, not only because of Cori Bush, but also Jamal Bowman, who was on with Bernie Sanders today. And don't forget that Mondaire Jones won, but that, of course, was recorded a few weeks ago. And Russ says, was watching the con, came in late. And Deborah says, thank you, Joe must go. And Steve Wolfbrand says, I live in L.A. and never heard of Bass till 2 weeks ago. She seems very cool, though. Steve says, how was it? Steve Wolfbrand, thanks for the update. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm sure the con is great, but it is about the election of 2000, or I should say, it is about the last crisis. And while we can learn things from the last crisis about this particular crisis, of course, I think the con's a bit late, right? It needed to come out last February. That's when we really needed it, didn't we? Because they've been doing it to us again. They've been doing it to us again, right? Matt says, with Biden's age and obvious cognitive decline, the VP would likely be president if they beat Trump. Yep. And the odds are they're going to beat the hell out of Trump right now. And Matt says, I think they're just floating Bass as a PR move to bring in progressives. I think, Matt, that if it's just for that, then that's a stupid move. Okay, because if they get progressives hopeful, and then they disappoint progressives, okay, by immediately going to Kamala Harris or to Susan Rice, that's going to disillusion progressives even more. I mean, it makes no sense to be floating her just as a PR move. Steve says, yep, you got it. And Avro says, trying papaya enzyme for celiacs tastes great. Avro says, that sounds about right. Steve Wolfbrand says, FYI, Newsom fucked his campaign manager's wife and his Nancy Pelosi's nephew. Yuck. He talks pretty, though. Kay says he sure doesn't seem too progressive for sure.
Does he have ice cream?
Does he have ice cream, Bonnie asks. Steve Wolfbrand says Tulsi could be a dark horse. She was friends with Bill Biden and a friend of the family. I know that. That's why I suggested Tulsi. And Deborah said, no screaming eagle shit, Bernie for vice. Oh, I scrolled down and lost my place. I'll get it back in a moment, people. And Matt says, please stop. Sanders and Gabbard have a zero chance. Yes, you're right, Matt. They have zero chance. But this is not about the probability. It's about one man making a decision, and you can't apply probability to that. If you apply anything that is like probability to that, it has to be likelihood. And there is a non-zero likelihood that either Sanders or Gabbard could be appointed by Biden. And the reason is that Biden is evidently personally close but to both, and he can work with them. So that gives a measure of likelihood to the possibility that either of them could be nominated by Joe Biden. Deborah Wilson says, I agree, Joe. Matt says, the war machine and Wall Street will get the candidates they control, red or blue. Most probably, I shouldn't say most probably, I should say most likely, based on what I just said. It's most likely true. But sometimes the non-likely occurs, as we know all too well. Remember, the probabilities were very small that Donald Trump was going to win in 2016. But the likelihood was a lot stronger. And Deborah Wilson says, Dem Party is too stupid. Avro Romano says the same. Steve Wolfbrand says, but Nina is a black woman, just saying, laugh out loud. Yes, both. But I think the likelihood that Nina Turner would be appointed the VP is much less, than the likelihood that either Tulsi or Bernie would be appointed. And Avril says, I shared all friends. And Steve says, Angelica Duenas would be a good squad member. Did she make it into the top two, Steve? Do you know? Has she made it into the top two primary? I hope so. I really like Angelica. So, Avril says, are the stores in you all's area starting to have less and less on the shelves too? No, not here. It seems like we're okay here. We saw shortages at first. For some months, there were shortages of things. But now all the things seem to have come back again.
Sanitizing wipes.
Except for sanitizing wipes. There's all kinds of sanitizer around, but the sanitizing wipes at Costco have not come back. Still can't get plain old Lysol spray here, and now cranberry juice is scarce too. That's my vitamin C increase daily. Someone else must have figured that out too. Russ says, off-topic question, is the Peter G. Peterson Foundation a is it a right-wing libertarian think tank? No. It's a center-right, neoliberal think tank that pushes austerity, but it is not a libertarian think tank. It pushes deficit reduction constantly and tries to prepare the way for the privatization of Social Security, which Peter G. Peterson hoped to profit from all his life, and which I'm sure his son now carries on in the noble tradition of hoping to profit from the privatization of the Social Security Trust Fund, which would be gifted. The Social Security Trust Fund would presumably be gifted to private individuals as an investment stake of some kind. I don't know how the hell they would handle that. Avril says, yes, Lysol is out of the question here too. I can't find a lot of stuff I used to. Boy, I think we're okay with Lysol here, right?
No, we have one. One spray.
Well, I haven't really noticed any shortages at Costco.
No, we weren't looking for it either.
That's true. Well, we should go to Big Lots and see. Avril says, I noticed empty shelves in 3 stores yesterday that used to stay locked. Steve says, sorry, I meant Corey Bush. Cake says, Tom Hartman said he looks to see Powell deserting Wall Street if Biden wins and letting it crash and burn. Well, that would be good. That would be good. If they crashed and burned, we could get rid of their influence and maybe convince Biden that all the banks ought to be nationalized. Russ Goldman says, definitely right wing always reeling against debt and deficits, but not sure about libertarian. They're not libertarian. Believe me, Peterson was never a libertarian. Never. He was a Nixonite, a Republican who started out as the president of Bell and Howell, and who got into government with Richard Nixon. He was Assistant Secretary of Commerce, and he's been banging around the government and private think tanks since that time, going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then he finally started some Wall Street firms himself, and they invested, and they made him a pile of money, like something like 3 or 4 trillion, and 3 or 4 billion, and he invested $1 billion of it in the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. And Steve Wolfbrand says Paula Jean isn't until November, I believe. Yes, that's correct, because she just won the primary in West Virginia, remember? She won the primary, so she's the Democratic choice, okay, in West Virginia. And she goes against Shelley Moore Capito, I don't know how she pronounces it, in West Virginia on November 3rd. Avril says, I apologize. About what, Avril? Thinking Paula Jean had a race yesterday, get confused. I had a Biden moment. It used to be known as a senior moment. From now on, it's going to be known as a Biden moment.
I like that.
Laugh out loud, no problem. I can't keep them all straight anymore. And Russ says, Biden has mouth management problems. Case says, I agree with you, Joe. Avril says, Bernie is looking so frail these days. I wonder if he's ill. Well, that could be it. That also could be a reason why he dropped out in the end. He might have known that he wasn't going to be able to take the way things were going in the campaign. Russ says, Tony Soprano for Prez, chuckles. And Kay says he's been working his ass off in the Senate trying to help people. That he has been doing. Steve says he's a pretty tough old goat. He's not an old goat. He's an old Brooklynite. He's a kid from Brooklyn. Avril says his VP, not only that, he's a Jewish kid from Brooklyn. his VP is going to have to put a horse bridle in his trap to keep him reined in. You mean Joe Biden, of course. And Steve says, forget about it. You forget about it. We don't want to forget about it. We want to keep it in front of him. Just because you're tired of hitting him with it is no reason why we should get tired. Averill says, where's Bonnie? I miss her laugh and being in the background. She's here. She's right to my left now. She's sitting and watching me.
And I giggle once in a while.
And she giggles once in a while. And Kay says, Ali Velshi and Dylan Radigan taught me about the 2008 crash back then. Well, Dylan Radigan was very entertaining, and he got a lot of things right, but Dylan Radigan is not a very good economist. I'm sorry. He doesn't know which end is up. And by the way, that may be why he lost his run for Congress, Kay, in New York, because he didn't know which things were up. And Steve Wolfbrand said, people here are very astute. Steve said, I like Radigan too. Yeah, it's hard not to like Radigan because he's got guts and he talks real well. And he gets angry about things he should get angry about. And so I like him too. Averill said, it was way before I learned MMT. So I don't know if I'd still like him knowing what I know now. I don't think you would, because he never learned MMT. He never bothered. Maybe he'll catch on now that Stephanie's book is out. That should be the kind of book he would get through in maybe 3 hours. Steve Wolfbrand says, yes, Angelica Duenas is on the November ballot. Look, if we could get enough people coming to these shows, I would invite her on my show again. But when I got a candidate on my show back then, I could pretty well figure I'd get maybe 40 people coming to the live stream. And the way things are going now, I don't even know if it would be worth her time. Kay says, yep, he's great. Has his own economy program on YouTube now. Ali used to be the money guy on CNN back too. My sanitizing wipes are paper towels and bleach. Averill says they can't be found. The paper towels can't be found? God.
Is there
Boy, we got plenty of paper towels here at Costco.
a Costco near them?
Oh, I'm sure there are many Costcos all throughout where they are. But Dylan Radigan guests on Jimmy Dore quite regularly. I know he does. Steve says, don't breathe too much bleach. Kay says, yes, I know. Not a big fan of Dore, but I watch him when Radigan is on. Averill says, I love the stuff. I wish they'd make it a deodorant or body spray. Steve says, Kamala slept her way to the top. She's a hoe.
Oh,
Who did she sleep with besides Willie Brown? Everybody knows she slept with Willie Brown. Everybody knows she was the mistress of downtown Willie Brown. Alvaro Romano says, not a sore fan either. Oops, Dore fan, damn autocorrect. Steve says, forget about it. Was a reply to Russell's Tony Soprano for Prez, laugh out loud. Radigan has been on the Convo Couch and other local LA shows. Oh, Angelica has been on Convo Couch. Yes, I know she has. And other LA shows. We love her. Yeah. She's been on my show too. 3 times. Averill, no Lysol wipes. Laugh out loud. Can't be found. Okay, guys. I appreciate knowing that things are getting short in various areas again, the critical supplies. I want to make sure I pick up some toilet paper tomorrow.
You can call Costco and they'll send it.
Well, I'm going to make sure we pick up some. Oh, I don't mean tomorrow, but on Monday.
Yeah.
We'll go shopping on Monday. I'm sure there'll still be some left on Monday. There was so much left last Monday. Oh, God. And Steve says, a nice show again. Thanks, Doc. Well, thank you for coming, Steve, and thank you for sharing. And Margot says, I super appreciate your show. Thank you, Margot. Nice to see you. And Deborah Wilson. I shared, guys, but right now I'm sleepy. Slept poorly last night. We'll get a good night's sleep tonight, Deborah. I hope you do. I got a good night's sleep last night. That was good. I hope to keep getting good night's sleeps. And JS says, I've never seen a troll here, just saying. Deborah says, a night all. I don't block people. If the trolls don't come here, it could be because I treat them too nicely and so they cannot troll as much or something. Kay says, thank you, Joe, and everybody for another great discussion. I love you all. Yep, I love you all too. So take care, everybody. And I'll see you tomorrow night. It's Thursday night. And I'll be back again with another one. And tomorrow, I'm going to be posting my short video, which is going to be about half the size that my short video was today. That went up to 15.5 minutes. But my short video tomorrow is going to be Keep the Pressure On. It will only help Joe. And it's 8 minutes and 32 seconds. So it's going to be pretty short. So good night, everybody. Oh, Arnold says, oh, your Costco delivers. Will they bring the cash registers with the cash still in it then? I'm afraid not. I'm afraid not. Okay, good night, folks.